wanted to discuss the question whether free will exists or not. So apparently this question there's still a lot of debate about it. I think there's a lot of people who kind of just take it for granted to think that of course we have free will because we feel like we have it, right? But there's also people who believe that because essentially everything is predetermined, this kind of deterministic view of things, and then they believe that this means that we couldn't possibly have free will because everything is predetermined, so we are, and what we do is as well. I personally believe that depending on how you define it, free will could exist as a part of our brain, basically. But we would have to take into account that the choices we make are not only based on free will, but they are also partly based on more like automatic choices, subconscious decisions. We make both conscious and subconscious decisions. So imagine that there's a part of our brain that is the conscious part, that is basically us, and in a lot of studies, this part of the brain is supposedly related to the prefrontal cortex. We can imagine it as part of the brain that not every animal necessarily has, but that some species have developed, right? And that in humans it leads to self-awareness. Then we also have the subconscious part of the brain, which kind of regulates more automatic processes that we don't really influence. Of course, there's a lot of things we don't influence, right? You're not thinking about everything that you do. You're not thinking about, I need to breathe now, or I need to blink. You're not thinking about every movement that your body is making. You're not even controlling all of your thoughts and everything you feel, or like there's many things that are kind of just automatic, just going on, and you are more like the observer, you're observing what's going on, and you also have the power to control part of what's going on. And the idea is there's this endless loop going on between the conscious and the subconscious parts of your brain that are constantly talking to each other, basically, and you are the conscious part of your brain. I personally don't believe that consciousness can only exist as something that's separate from the brain, as some kind of ghost or something that talks with the brain. Biologists generally don't believe that we are mindless machines or something. At least from what I've learned, what they believe is mostly that our consciousness can completely be explained through biology, and it doesn't have to be explained through something spiritual or religious. And we also don't have to say something like our will doesn't exist or our consciousness doesn't exist because it's all an illusion or something. As Vancouver has carefully argued, we do not need to invoke a homunculus, a little person in our head, to generate control theory level explanations of behavior and motivation. There's no need for an agent within the agent. To use Gazzaniga's example, as enzymes can modulate the genes that encode them, effortful consciousness can modulate the unconscious processes that influence it. Because there was this whole idea that some people had that, technically speaking, it could be an illusion, right? It could be an illusion that we have free will, this illusion that we only believe that we are in control so that it keeps us happy, Just like colors are an illusion, right? When I see a color, I know that it's not real. It's just my brain's interpretation of the amount of light that's coming into my eyes. And the same goes with like pain. If you feel pain, it's not real. It's just my interpretation that something is bad, And the same goes with happiness, sadness. Technically speaking, it's all fake. So then I understand that there are a lot of people who kind of take this to another level by kind of saying that maybe everything is fake, maybe our own will is also fake. I thought about this, okay? And what I wanted to add is that even though, yes, how we interpret things is often not objective, at the same time, you have to understand that everything evolves for a reason. So, of course, why do we feel pain? For a reason. But then I want to ask the question, why do we even have a consciousness in the first place? We have a sense of, this is who I am. But we have these complex thoughts, we have this self-awareness. What is the use of a consciousness if it cannot control anything, right? That's what I'm wondering. So I know a lot about evolution. In nature, like something simple could evolve for no reason, and then it could just stay because it didn't do any harm. But like something complex never evolves for no reason. And I think you could regard our consciousness as seemingly something pretty complex, because we seem to associate our whole self-awareness, and the fact that we can have thoughts, we seem to see it as a sign of intelligence, that a lot of other animals don't seem to have this self-awareness. But if it really is complex, then it must have evolved for a reason. We argue that it is implausible that the metabolic costs inherent to conscious processes would have evolved in humans without any adaptive benefits. If our awareness doesn't do anything anyway, then why do we even need it? Wouldn't we have been totally fine without it? Imagine we had a consciousness, but we wouldn't have free will, and we would just constantly feel like, oh no, I am doing things, but I didn't choose to do it, right? We would feel like we are trapped in a body that does things that we don't want to do. But then, in order to feel that way, you still need a degree of awareness to realize that I exist and I have things that I want, but I am not doing those things, You still need an awareness. Couldn't we just not be aware, just kind of blindly following what feels good and avoiding what feels bad, and just living like that without any thoughts of our own, right? It has often been said that consciousness provides flexibility. This is true, but only because consciousness makes volitional action that can go beyond any programming, possible. The adaptive benefit of volition is that it gives the organism the flexibility needed to improve upon the automatic reactions of a non-conscious creature. Instead of just assuming that, oh yeah, of course we do, of course we have self-awareness, but evolution made it so that we believe that we are acting from our own will, so that we don't freak out. Like, yeah, I can see how that makes sense, but you're forgetting, why do we even have awareness in the first place? Of course, we constantly receive information from the outside world. Through our senses, we constantly receive information, and then it's processed in our brain, subconsciously first, where sometimes some things really come into your awareness and sometimes they don't. Of course, there are all these mechanisms going on and thresholds and stuff that decide if something should come into your awareness or not, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. I do believe that everything is basically an ongoing chain reaction, but that doesn't mean that it can't be a complex system, and that the system could not even, the system, I believe, can even change itself. You start with subconscious information, then it comes into awareness, then the awareness starts the decision-making process, like, what should I do with this information? And then eventually the awareness decides on a choice, and then it starts sending a signal, for example, to your body again, like, I want to move my hands like this, and then it happens, and then you receive new information, and the whole loop just keeps repeating itself. Of course, you might start thinking, like, does that mean that we are really free? But I will come back to that later. The idea is that our conscious self can inform the subconscious. For example, when we have some kind of rational thoughts about something, if we have an insight that maybe we got by consciously thinking about something, then our subconscious will probably also be informed of this information. And then the subconscious also informs us by giving us information. For example, if your subconscious figures out a solution to a problem, but you didn't figure it out yourself, it was your subconscious, then at some point it might come into your awareness and you might see it and make a judgment on it. Like, what am I going to do with it? Do I think I should use this for something? You know, do I think I should use this insight or not? How do I feel about it? You know, so that's kind of how these parts of your brain communicate with each other, and they can both also suppress each other in a way. For example, we can suppress automatic actions, you know, like for example, the whole idea of like having self-control, or you want to change habits, you know. Imagine, for example, you are hungry, you're feeling hungry or something, but you know consciously that you decided that you are on a diet and you don't want to eat right now, but there is food right in front of you. This is just an example. So, for example, then you're more automatic. If you weren't thinking, you were just kind of like not paying attention, you might try to subconsciously make decisions, kind of be like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm gonna grab the food and eat it, you know. But if you're more conscious, you're more aware, you realize like, no, I decided that I'm not gonna do this. And then you can basically suppress this more automatic response. And the same goes for the other way around. Like, you know, even if you decided that you want to change your behavior, you might still be influenced by the subconscious part of your brain that maybe wants you to eat, you know, because it's going to help you survive, but you don't. Your subconscious is also influencing you, you know. But think about the subconscious as in it is about, for example, revisiting old patterns in your brain, things that are habits, things that are part of your routine, things that cost you less energy to do, because there's already a complete path, there's a complete neural pathway in your brain already to perform this action, because you performed it over and over again, and it's probably less energy consuming to just do that again, you know, because it's already kind of wired into your brain. So you also don't need to concentrate, you just can do it quite easily, right? So I think part of the subconscious part of your brain, the good thing about it is that it probably costs you less energy. And it's also about reflexes, but also just collecting information. Other things, of course, that you have no control over, or at least not much control, is what you feel, sometimes even your thoughts, but also if you feel pain or not, you know. And then the thing that your conscious brain does is mostly just being aware, becoming aware of things, and then generating thoughts, directing thoughts, generating actions, and also creating new brain patterns, like new pathways in your brain, new habits, you know, learning new things. Conscious control processes are effortful. They focus attention in the face of interference. They experience information in a serial format, one thing at a time. They can generate solutions that are not hardwired, and they operate over a constrained cognitive workspace, working memory, to which we have access and can later report on as a component of conscious awareness. Effortful processes sit in contrast to automatic processes, which are fast and parallel and do not require conscious awareness. Effortful tasks can be made automatic through repetition, like reading and driving. And when they become automatic, they suffer less from the addition of a secondary task. So one reason why there are a lot of people nowadays saying, kind of arguing that free will does not exist, is because there was a research paper that was published where they did an interesting experiment where people would be asked to decide when to press a button, and then they would kind of see this thing called a readiness potential, where it was a measurement that could predict when someone was going to press the button, when someone was going to move. They could see that this happened already before people actually said that they had consciously decided that they wanted to press the button. But before that, this readiness potential already happened, which was basically a preparation to make this movement, which everyone claimed that this meant that instead of making a decision ourselves, it was just an automatic, subconsciously generated decision, and we were already preparing to move before we even realized that we're going to move or decided that we were going to move. But because of this paper, there's a lot of people who think that this proves that free will does not exist. And I just wanted to add a bit more discussion, because I think that there's a lot more to this than people seem to think. For example, if it is true that we both make conscious decisions and we make subconscious decisions, then it could be possible that this decision to press a button, even though we might really think that it was conscious, actually it was a subconscious decision that we kind of just went with. Like, for example, I subconsciously decide that, yeah, I should just press the button right now, because you don't really care. It's not an important decision. You just decide to go with it, right? It's like this, your brain is kind of urging you to do it, and then you're like, yeah, sure, I'm doing it now, whatever. So that's one argument I want to talk about. Even if consciousness would be redundant when it comes to button presses or finger movements, it is crucial for decision making and planning for the future, for example. Maybe we make conscious decisions, but we don't make them all the time. We only make them when something's really important to us. But I think that a lot of the time, we kind of just do things subconsciously because we don't care. It's like easier. It doesn't need a lot of concentration. And then also some people, they did kind of a similar experiment where people were doing a finger tapping task. So basically, these people in this experiment were asked to either do random tapping with their fingers, but they were also asked to do the same thing, but then try to avoid repetitions and try to avoid patterns. And they discovered that when they tried to actively, consciously avoid repetitions and patterns, they set readiness potentials. So these are the same potentials I talked about earlier. These readiness potentials, they also measured them. They were modulated by cognitive control. So they changed. These findings challenge the most radical accounts of the non-existence of free will, and instead provide support for a more balanced model of human behavior, in which cognitive control may constrain automatic response tendencies in response preparation and action execution. So for example, when someone was getting ready to tap their finger, but they decided no, I don't want to do this automatic response because I'm supposed to control what I'm doing. I'm supposed to avoid repetitions, Then what happened is that they could still change their action if they wanted to. it's not that whenever this readiness potential started showing up, that their decision was already permanent. It's not a permanent decision. And the same person who also wrote the other paper that I talked about also discovered that, said the same thing, that these decisions were made subconsciously, but they could still be controlled, they could still be stopped as well. They could still decide against it if you're not too late, if you're not already moving, right? But if you're in time, then this readiness potential was not a sign of a permanent decision necessarily. So then we can definitely say that we can inhibit more automatic responses. So I was thinking about it, right? And I was thinking, how can free will exist in a system that's basically an endless feedback loop? Like, how does it even work? And so I was thinking about it, and then I had an idea. After a lot of searching, I finally found a paper that completely explains the big picture in the same way that I imagined it. So I'm really glad I found that paper, and I'm gonna use that to kind of explain my view on this as well. And of course, that's the thing, so your conclusion, if you're gonna say like, does free will exist, yes or no, highly depends on what's your definition of free will in the first place. So it could be that I'm here like, I think free will exists, but that maybe you even agree with me, like you agree with the things that I say, but maybe you still don't think that free will exists because you don't define it in the same way. But I personally think that free will is the ability to act in accordance to our sense of self. So basically, we don't have to do something that we decide against. We don't have to do something that we don't want to do. We don't have to do something that doesn't really align with who we think we are and what we think we want. But our behavior, I think, is still going to be predictable, because I think that if you look at a person, if you know what they want, then they're always going to make the same decisions, right? They're always going to act in accordance to what they want. They're always going to act in accordance to what they think their values are. So I think technically, like, people are not fully unpredictable, and it depends how you see it. Like, if you think that free will means that we are free to do anything, in practice, are we gonna be that unpredictable? Like, technically speaking, why would you do something that you don't want? I think that our behavior could easily be predicted. Of course, we are always going to try to either go after what we want, or we are going to try to make the smartest decision possible. And if you knew what information I have, if you knew all the information I have, you could also predict maybe what I'm going to do, because you could predict my reasoning process. You could predict what is going to be, in my mind, the smartest thing to do. So then technically you could predict what I'm gonna do, right? So I don't really think people are fully unpredictable, but I personally think that freedom is more so about not being forced into things. But you had different motives, and you had long-term goals that you were focused on, and you had the last word, And even if that happens as technically an automatic process, if that happens kind of automatically as this endless loop where it's like, okay, I receive information and I judge this information. Does this align with who I am? Does this align with, and what's happening in your brain is that you're looking at information, you're becoming aware of it, and then you're looking at it, you are checking with your idea of who you are, your idea of what you want. You are imagining alternatives. So one thing of our consciousness that then we can choose between different alternatives. We can generate alternatives in our mind, basically. Effortful, conscious processes differentially access material from unconscious representations, creatively construct alternatives, value them, and then choose among these different possible future selves. We can think about, okay, I could do this or that, so I'm gonna choose to do this because we compare it to our idea of what we want and who we are. Which means that part of this loop is constantly checking if what I think I'm gonna do is aligned with what I want, and then weighing alternative options, right? And then choosing what to do, and then sending out a signal to our body to actually do it. The reason why I think that free will does exist is because we are able to influence what we do based on who we think we are, means that we are always going to act according to what we want. An individual does not get lucky by making a decision consistent with their identity, as some critics of libertarianism have claimed. Healthy individuals always make the choice most consistent with their identity because they construct that identity in the process of deliberation. And we are not going to act only based on automatic or subconscious decisions, because we always consciously check, is this what I want? And then we can also kind of use our conscious reasoning to kind of come up with new insights, come up with new solutions, planning things, It's this system that's constantly responding to different parts of itself. And you could see it as a chain reaction still. But part of the chain reaction is checking in with yourself, checking in with who you think you are, which means that in the end, if you didn't have a consciousness, then you would behave differently, If you would compare a person with a consciousness and then another person without it, even if everything else in their brain, in their genetics was the same, right? Even if their environment was the same, they would end up doing different things, because one of them was making decisions based on a conscious idea of a self, and the other was kind of just automatically making decisions without any conscious control. And say that I don't know what to do. For example, I have a problem. I feel like I'm forced to do something that I don't want to do. Then this negative emotional response might force my brain into kind of trying to find a solution, how can I avoid this, and then it starts generating a solution. I start collecting all information that I think is relevant for this problem. I start generating a solution. I start acting on the solution. But imagine you didn't have this consciousness to even tell you whoa, this is not what I want, then you're going to end up doing different things. You wouldn't have an awareness in the first place. You wouldn't know what you want. Technically speaking, you could say that maybe our entire life is completely predictable. Maybe that's how it is. But we would still act different than someone who would not have consciousness. And we will still act in accordance to who we think we are. And that's how we do actively influence our behavior. And I think that that means that free will does exist, but I could totally understand it if a lot of people think that that means that we're not free. But I don't know, I think that that means that we're free, because it means that with every step that we take, we are moving closer to ourselves. It means that our consciousness has use. It means that it does something. It's not like our thoughts are just kind of there, you know, not doing anything. So yeah, basically, we have the power to act how we want, even if that power is limited, because we all know that our willpower is limited. You know, for example, even the simplest thing, as like, if we're tired but we want to stay awake, like, yeah, if you're too tired, you're not gonna be able to do it. Your willpower is not always gonna be able to influence everything, but it's still there. It still influences some of the things that we do. Yeah, so even if this power is limited, we can't just write it off like it doesn't exist, you know. Of course, it's a whole different question if can we even influence who we are. So yeah, I guess we cannot control who we are. Okay, so that took me a long time to explain. This is one of those topics where you can just go and research it forever. I could, you know, but I already spent so much time on this that I think it ends here. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.